So now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and guest speaker for the evening. Our moderator is entrepreneur, investor, and generous philanthropist, J.B. Pritzker. His business interests are varied. Perhaps most notable are his dedication and passion for building a robust technology sector in the Midwest. He founded 1871, one of the world's leading incubators, and served as founding chairman of Chicago Next, Chicago's Council on Innovation and Technology. Mr. Pritzker has won numerous business awards, including EY's Master Entrepreneur of the Year Award, Tech Investor of the Year by Moxie Awards, and ACG's Lifetime Achievement Award. JB is managing partner at Pritzker Group, a private investment firm with offices in Chicago and Los Angeles. Pritzker Group comprises 3 professional investment teams: middle market acquisitions, technology venture capital, and asset management. Now, JB is an active civil leader and engaged board member of a number of cultural, educational, and business organizations. And we're thankful to have him as one of our own board of directors and also to have him here with us tonight. Welcome, JB. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our honored speaker this evening. Ben Silbermann co-founded Pinterest and now serves as CEO for the app that last year was valued at $11 billion. Pinterest describes itself as the world's catalog of ideas. It's a tool that helps people discover and do what they love, a place for you to discover your own tastes and not worry about what everyone else is up to. People use Pinterest to find everyday ideas for every part of their life, from recipes to style inspiration to home hacks. Now, Ben first got the idea for Pinterest from his childhood love of collecting things like insects and stamps. Now, after graduating from Yale in 2003, Ben started his career at an IT consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Ben then worked his way west and joined Google in customer support for AdSense, Google's display advertising group. And in 2010, at the age of 27, he co-founded Pinterest with 2 friends. Initially an invitation-only site, Pinterest grew to 3,000 users after the first 3 months, and now has over 150 million users worldwide. He credits his wife with the catchy name Pinterest. And Ben currently lives in San Francisco with his wife and 2 children. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ben Silbermann.
Well, thanks for having me. JB said I could talk about what I want, but honestly, the only thing I'm really qualified to talk about is Pinterest. So that's what I was going to do today. In 2008, I was working at Google in Mountain View, California. And every night, I'd come home to my apartment where me and my girlfriend lived, and I would tell her about all these great ideas I had for starting an internet product. And we've been dating for a couple years already, and so she'd seen this movie play out before. And on this night, I don't know what got into her, but she looked at me and said lovingly, it'd be great if you either just did it or just stopped talking about it. That's true love, right? And later that week, that's what I did. I quit my job. And for the next 2 years, after a bunch of false starts, I tried to start businesses. And in 2010, we would launch Pinterest. Today, Pinterest is used by people to get ideas for their everyday life, what they want to wear, what they want to eat, what they want to do with their kids. And I wanted to tell you the story of what happened along the way, what went wrong, what went right, and what we learned. And so I thought maybe I would start by just telling you guys a little bit about myself. So I grew up in Iowa, not this part of Iowa. I grew up in Des Moines. And both of my parents are doctors. They're both eye doctors. This is a picture of them in front of a practice that they ran in Des Moines for 35 years. And both of my sisters are doctors now as well. One is an oncologist and one is a neurologist. My dad's dad, he was a doctor. and my mom's dad was a physicist. So it was safe to say that science and medicine kind of colored everything about how I grew up. Some dads tell their kids stories about great quarterbacks, and my dad would tell me great stories about mathematicians and surgeons. I had, as now the whole room knows, very geeky habits. I used to collect insects and categorize them in my basement. My first high school job was in a hospital lab. I did data entry, and I cleaned glassware. And so when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a doctor too, and I was pre-med for that first year. But somewhere around my sophomore year, I think right in between organic chemistry and another pre-med requirement, I started to get the feeling that maybe it wasn't for me. Because at that time, that path of being a doctor was starting to diverge with what I was really falling in love with, which was the internet. See, college was the first time I'd ever had my own laptop with high-speed internet, and I was in love with the internet. I still am. I love this idea that no matter where you are in the world, everyone has access to the same information as everyone else. And I love the idea that one person in a bedroom or a basement, they could write something or take a photo, and everybody else could see it. And so just for fun, I started making little internet toys with my friends. I made a tool that would let you collect your family's medical health history. You could write to your aunts and uncles and cousins, and they'd provide that information. I made a trivia game where anybody could write a question on any topic and anyone could answer it. And that love of the internet eventually led me to go work at Google. Google was the place to work at the time. And the only problem was that to get any really good job at Google, you had to be a computer scientist. But I figured I'd just get my foot in the door, and I took a job in customer support. I would say that Google was culture shock in the best possible way. It wasn't just that there was free food, although that was nice. It was that they took every idea, no matter how crazy, and they took it seriously. When I grew up, son of doctors, the first question you're always asking is, what could go wrong? That's what doctors do. They figure out what could go wrong, and they make sure that doesn't happen. And at Google, the first question they would always ask is, what could go right? There would be these crazy ideas. Let's take a photo of every street in the world. Let's take books and slice off the bindings and scan them so everyone can read them. Let's teach a car to drive itself. And what I learned at Google was that even if 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 of those ideas works, the scale of technology would deliver it to the whole world. And that was a really special moment for me. The only problem was that at Google, without a computer science degree, I would never be able to make any of those products that I'd always wanted to make. And that's what led me to that conversation with my girlfriend, and that's what led me to take my job. I'll always be super grateful for the path my parents taught me, which is work hard and plan forward and avoid mistakes. But Google taught me a different way of doing things, that sometimes the best place to start isn't to ask what's wrong, but what could go right. And I'll always be thankful for having a chance to work there. So I quit my job, and I was an entrepreneur, just like that. I had no employees, no product, no customers, no paycheck. And I told my mom this, and she said, Ben, it sounds suspiciously like you are unemployed. And truthfully, for those first couple years, there was not a lot to show for my efforts. I picked up that idea of collecting medical history, but it turned out people weren't excited to type their medical history into a website. The iPhone had just come out, and I hooked up with a friend from college named Paul, and we thought, the iPhone is so cool, let's put all the catalogs in the world of the iPhone. But the platform wasn't really ready yet, and that wasn't going anywhere either. But in 2009, we lucked out. Fate intervened, and I went to New York City, because at this point, I was running out of savings. Even at Google, customer support didn't pay that well, and I was looking everywhere about where I could get some more money to try to build products. And I found out that there was a business plan competition run by NYU. What was special about this competition was the rules were a little bit loose. Specifically, you didn't have to go to business school there. You just had to know somebody at business school there. And so I entered the contest. Two amazing things happened on that trip. The first is that we got second place in the business plan competition, which doesn't sound good, because there wasn't much prize money, but the prize was a meeting with a venture capitalist that was an alumni of that school. And I don't know whether it was school loyalty or just pity, but that guy cut us a check for a couple $100,000. And the second thing that happened was a mutual friend who'd moved to New York introduced me to this guy, the tall one, named Evan Sharp. Evan was studying architecture at Columbia at the time, and he was making websites at night to pay the bills, and Evan and I just clicked. Like, we had the same geeky hobbies. He loved nature and art and design, and we both loved the internet. And we would stay up at night brainstorming what we could make. We'd talk about what are the things that we did as kids that might make cool products, and one thing that we both did is we both collected things. I collected bugs, Evan collected baseball cards. And when we thought about it, we thought, collections, they're a little bit quirky when you're a grown-up, but why isn't there a tool for collecting all the great things you find on the internet? What could go right if you built that? We figured that the books on your bookshelf, that's a kind of collection. The furniture in your home, that's a kind of collection. The clothes in your closet, those are collections too. And we thought we'd model it after a collection like this, a pinboard, the kind that you see hanging in fashion houses or in commercial studios, or this one in Evan's office. And Evan, being a designer, started meticulously designing the most beautiful online pinboard that we could imagine. This is where we started. And Evan kept working through that design. We were building it out there in California. And we ended up building something that looked a little bit like this. And I was so excited. This was like the best thing I'd ever built. I emailed out all my friends at Google. We emailed all of Evan's friends back in New York. I really thought that I would hit send and like confetti would just burst out of my computer. And nothing happened. Nobody had any idea what we were building. It looked so different than all the other services that were online at that time. And those were pretty desperate times. I used to live near an Apple store in Palo Alto, and on my way home to market, I would stop in and I would change all the laptop screens to Pinterest.com. And I would stand in the back and say, hey, this Pinterest thing's really taking off. And that did not work. But funny enough, eventually people started using it, and it wasn't the people that we expected. It was actually people here in the Midwest. It was moms, teachers, it was people that loved fashion and design, it's people that had esoteric hobbies like woodworking and motorcycle modding. They were regular people, and they were using it for regular things in their life. And we were incredibly excited. This is a photo from a meetup that we held, and we just asked the people using the service to come on out, and I cherished those users. I worked in customer support, so I gave these people customer support that the Ritz-Carlton would have been proud of. You could email me at any time of the day, and I would email you back with my cell phone number, and I would call them up, we would solve their problem, and after the call, I would just then look up their pinboards and send them more ideas that they could put in on their own. And they were creeped out by that, so I stopped doing that. People said this. They said, I use Pinterest to discover ideas for my everyday life. They weren't just collecting things. They were looking at the collections that other people were putting up. See, at that time, search engines were great if you already knew what you were looking for, if you'd seen it before. But say you have a question like this. What's a cool new idea for dinner? What should I wear to a business meeting? What could my home look like? What are activities that I could do with my kid? These are questions where there's not one right answer. They're questions that are all about seeing possibilities. They're questions about finding what's right for you. And at that time, there wasn't a service that could help you do that. So things started to take off. And what people loved about Pinterest was that it was different. Facebook was out, and it was about your past. You put up there what you wanted to do. And Twitter was out. It was about the present. But Pinterest was a service that people could use to think optimistically about my future, and not in some abstract way, like who do I want to be, about the practical things that make your everyday life great. We ran these meetups, and things were actually taking off. Hundreds of users became thousands, thousands became tens of thousands, and what started off as something great actually ended up being a little bit of a problem, because the more users we had, the higher that our burn rate was to pay for computing, And unfortunately, investors, mostly in California and some in New York, they still just did not get what was happening. It looked too different from the services they'd seen before. And I ended up learning this really important lesson. Silicon Valley is a place that's ostensibly open-minded, but everyone's subject to their own biases. Everyone's trying to fit things that are different into the same mold. I had an investor tell me, I just don't see an online scrapbook getting that big. That habit of falling into old patterns, it happens to everyone. It's why it's so hard for so many women and so many minorities to break into new businesses, because people don't think they look like what a successful person looks like. And we lucked out. Eventually the numbers were irrefutable. Right? We were the fastest service ever to hit 10 million users, and we were able to secure funding. But that lesson, that sometimes it's what makes you weird, that makes you valuable, is something that I still really cherish today. So that's how we started. And the next 2 years were the complete opposite. They were kind of a blur. They were, in Silicon Valley terms, what they call hyper-growth. We went from a team that was working in an office like this. That's Evan at his desk. Mine was the standing desk behind him. This is our engineering team. To an office that looked more like this. To an office that looked more like this. This is 6 months later. This is what it looked like in 2 years. The service in 2014 had roughly 50 million users. Funding had come in after the financial crisis. We raised hundreds of millions of dollars. We'd grown from 25 to 325 people in just a couple years. And while all that growth was great, honestly, it was so different than what we'd started a couple years ago. Our early employees were the kind of quirky risk takers that join a company in an apartment where there's no funding. I used to say, there's a great perk here. You can have any computer you want, as long as you bring it from home. And we started hiring the best people that we could find. We hired people from companies like Google and Facebook. We hired students from the most pedigreed universities. We would give applicants these crazy puzzles. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and the whiteboard looked like a scene out of A Beautiful Mind. And I told Evan, I honestly don't think that we could get hired here anymore. It was a weird time, actually. And it was a time that wasn't all good for me personally. I had never managed anyone before, and that lightness that I learned at Google, that feeling of what could go right, was gradually being replaced by this panic attack of all the things that could go wrong. What would happen if all these people lost jobs, or I lost all that money? This is how I would spend my time. I would read books with titles like Blue Ocean Strategy, Good to Great. Where a couple years ago we would make product choices based on intuition and our understanding of what people loved, now everything was run through a complicated experiment. And I began to feel like somehow something that started off so unique was looking like every other technology company in the Valley. Evan and I got together, and I talked to some of my friends and my family, and we felt like we had to change something, or the company we were building wouldn't be a company where we even belonged anymore. And if this was a movie, this is where we go to like an ashram, where I'd pen a memo late at night and everything would change. But honestly, it was over 2 years that we just made a bunch of hard calls to change the company that we were building. We got rid of people that had joined a hot company but didn't really care about our mission. We started to reorganize the company to feel more like a collection of startups. We hosted a company event. We shut it down for 2 days. And we asked everyone to come in and teach some of the quirky skills and fun things that they did to give them a feeling for what Pinterest was doing for users, giving them inspiration to try something new. People taught classes on lockpicking and ballroom dancing and how to apply your makeup properly. We started actually to focus on building a diverse workforce, not just hiring women and underrepresented minorities, but hiring people from backgrounds that were different. People that might not have gone to the best school, but still had that weird, quirky, creative genius that we felt was incredibly important. And that work isn't done. I think that the lesson I learned at that time was that there's a big difference between hiring smart people and building a great team. 2 years ago, I had only admired people because of singular brilliance. And now, the people that I cherished the most were the ones that could develop that brilliance in all the folks around them. We started telling people the stories of how users were using Pinterest every day. Stories like these two women, they live in New York, and they bought a cabin, and they used Pinterest to decorate it. They're standing in front of the yellow door they pinned on Pinterest. Stories like T.A. Woods, who decided he finally wanted to learn how to cook, and Pinterest was going to be the way that he was going to do it, and he picked it up as a hobby, and now it's what he does with his family every weekend. Stories like Lizzie, who lives in San Francisco, just uses Pinterest to keep track of what beauty products she's going to buy next. Because those stories gave purpose to why people came to work every day. And those stories animated the actual products and decisions that we had to make as a really young business. This is me and Evan at that first event, that 2-day event. And I remember this is one of my highlights because we'd done something that no advisor in their right mind thought was a good idea. We took highly paid engineers, highly paid designers, we just told them to stop working and try something totally new. And I believe to this day that doing that, taking time to do something completely off the beaten path, to learn a new skill, to get perspective that's not your own, will pay back multifold to our company in the long term. So what's next? This is a picture that I really love. I don't know if you've seen it before. It's an artifact from the 60s called the Last Whole Earth Catalog. My mom had a copy because she was a little bit of a hippie. It was made by this guy, Stuart Brandt. He made it on a photocopier with scissors and tape. And this catalog had crazy ideas, fun tools, interesting projects to build, and you would flip through it, and it would spark your imagination to try something new. It got famous because Steve Jobs took one of the most famous quotes off this issue, "Stay hungry and stay foolish." It was kind of an icon of the generation. And I still think that vision of a catalog of ideas that you can flip through and find new things for your life is a really beautiful one. We want to build this thing called the world's catalog of ideas, personalized for you. Today, Pinterest has 75 billion ideas, all of them handpicked by 150 million people. And our job is to go through those ideas and find the handful that will make your life better, that correspond to your tastes, your aspirations, and your interests. People make pin boards about food and gardening and beauty and travel. And when you go to Pinterest and you tap that home screen, you should see a feed that feels like it was handmade. It's not about what your friends like. It's not about what's popular. You can browse through and start one place and end up somewhere else. And if you do find something that you really love, we'll give you everything you need to make it part of your life. If it's a product, we want to let you buy it. If it's a recipe, we want to let you cook it. If it's a project, we want to let you know how it'll turn out. We built our own search engine, a search engine that does 2 billion searches a month and growing. And unlike Google, that gives you one answer, we wanted to show you all the possible answers. Maybe one day you want to make dinner, and you find out, hey, maybe for the first time, I'll try something out that's vegetarian. Maybe you want to bake something for a special occasion, but you just want to find something special that you haven't tried before. We built a computer vision team, and their job is to look inside images. If you're looking at a living room, what's that chair? What's that photo? What's that pillow? So you can take something broad and find something narrow. And my personal favorite is a new feature. We let people show how things turned out. And sometimes they turned out great, and sometimes it's a hilarious failure, but that's okay. Pinterest is a place where people aren't afraid to laugh at themselves and at least pat themselves on the back for trying something new. You know, in Silicon Valley, there are still a lot of people that don't really understand what Pinterest is for. It doesn't feel like real, hard technology to them. When they think of it, they think of things like virtual reality, artificial intelligence. But I think hard technology can also be applied to everyday things. We're not building virtual reality, but we're helping people in their real life figure out what to do with their kids, or find an outfit that makes them feel good about themselves, or maybe decorate a new home. And I know that's really been true for me. This is Divya, who gave me that kick in the butt to go start a company. And after I did, I finally took her on vacation, which was about 4 years overdue, and we planned it on Pinterest. When we got married, we planned that on Pinterest too. What flowers, what dress, what ring. And when we have kids, which we do now, 2 of them, 2 boys, we find activities for those kids as well. I really think that even though Pinterest isn't a lot of people's idea of hard technology, it helps make everyday things a little bit better. And I believe that for most people, those everyday things, those are everything. And that's why we're continuing to build it today. That's it.
Terrific. Well, Ben, my goodness. I asked you when we were sitting there together if you ever imagined you'd be running a company with 1,000 people, and what was your answer?
Answer was no. I did not. It was funny, I think a little bit of the reason why I wanted to start a company is I'm pretty introverted, and I didn't want to deal with a lot of people. And I'm like, look where I've landed up.
You screwed this up. So you started out in Iowa, and you ended up in Silicon Valley. Have you thought about picking up and moving Pinterest to Illinois?
Well, we have an office in Illinois, here in Chicago.
It's not big enough.
It's growing. It's growing. But no, it's funny. I think that when I decided to move to California, I just felt like I wanted to be closer to people that were doing the same thing I was doing. But I think that's a lot less true today. I think actually there are people starting companies in a lot of places, and I think a lot of the great companies are going to be started outside of Silicon Valley because it's more affordable. There are a lot of other industries, so I'm really excited about what you're doing in Chicago here.
And what's the key, just so we can get your advice on this, what do you think is the key to attracting an entrepreneur like you to Chicago? What would be the one thing you'd be looking for?
I think that people want to be around people like them. People that when you say, I want to start a company, instead of looking at you like you're crazy, they're like, oh, that's great. How could it help? I actually think that building a community of people for whom that's a regular occurrence is the best thing that you can do if you want to build startups.
Mm-hmm. So you've described Pinterest in a lot of different ways, but you always say it's not a social network. Can you distinguish it from the social networks? Because people do often confuse it.
Yeah, I think that, when I use social networks, and I use Facebook and Instagram, the whole goal is to get a reaction from other people. I don't know if you ever had this feeling, like you post a photo, and if no one likes it, you quietly delete it. But Pinterest is actually just about you, right? People, they know that the ideas come from other folks, but they're people that no one saves or likes the things they pin, but they do it for themselves. And so, we had a user really early on, and she said, Pinterest is me time, and Facebook is them time. And I think there's a real truth in that fact.
Is there an evolution over time of what people have pinned? If you had to describe today what the kind of most popular kinds of things on Pinterest are, and if you look back, I don't know, 2 years and 4 years and 6 years, is there an evolution?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me is just the diversity of what people pin. I focused a lot on everyday things like food and fashion and home, but honestly, you can type in anything, and you'll find communities of people that are pinning about it. Graphic design, tattoos, custom motorcycles, medieval weaponry. Anything that you can imagine, people are passionate about it, and those people, they want to collect those things, and they want to get new ideas to kind of fuel that passion.
Are there things that people pin that you have to, there must be some screening that you all do. I imagine there's a lot of unusual things that get pinned. How does
That's a nice way of saying it.
Sure. So how do you manage that, and what are the rules?
We have a set of terms of service, and it starts with things that are probably pretty obvious. No pornography, nothing hateful to any group. And we have both technology and people to try to enforce that. I think that one of the things that's special about Pinterest that we need to protect is it's a little bit rare on the internet, but it's actually a very positive place. Right? And it has to be that way because if you're thinking about ideas in your future, that's actually a little bit of a vulnerable thing to do. If you're saying, hey, I might look good in this dress, and someone comments is like, you look terrible, right? It's just not worth your time. And so we kind of protect and nurture that place where you can feel safe going out on a limb and thinking about what you want in your future. We allow people to keep things secret, and we do enforce those terms pretty aggressively.
And what do you worry about? I mean, there's a lot of fake news on Facebook. There's bullying on Twitter. What do you worry about on Pinterest?
I worry, personally, I worry about false information that can hurt people.
Like what?
Well, for example, my parents are doctors, and spreading information that people shouldn't be vaccinated is really dangerous, my parents would always tell me, everyone's entitled to opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And it really hurts people, So those are things where we have to figure out as the service becomes more global, how do we handle that? How do we communicate it to people in the right way who might not have ill intent? And how do we operate in what often is a pretty gray and new area?
What do you think is the thing that attracts, I mean, you've obviously grown at an unprecedented speed. So what is the critical sort of element to you? Is it that Pinterest is aspirational? What is it about Pinterest that has made you sort of the fastest growing startup?
I think that everybody spends time thinking about how they can make themselves and parts of their lives a little bit better. I think it's one of the most basic things you do. It's just like basic hope and optimism. And Pinterest gives them this tool to do it in a really concrete way. So the way people hear about Pinterest to this day, the number one way people hear about it, is somebody gets an idea and they try it out, and then they tell their friends, hey, check out this cool thing I did. I found it on Pinterest. And so as a company, we're always thinking about how do we close that loop from a spark of inspiration to giving somebody the knowledge and encouragement to actually make it happen. And I think that's the flywheel that's driven our growth to date.
All right, so we've got a lot of startups and CEOs in the audience who are running fast-growing companies, technology companies here in Chicago. And one of the things that I'm sure that many of them have either already gone through or waiting for that moment that they'll go through is that moment in your business when you realize you've hit something big or it's got an inflection. Did you recognize that in your business at one moment? Was there something hit you? Or, as many people often say, their businesses are really, 10-year overnight successes. They worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and it's big success and there wasn't a moment. Or was there something that you realized at some moment, like, this is it, I've hit this kernel of a great opportunity?
Well, I think it was definitely a grind. I remember vividly, though, when I started to see people in the service that were not blood relatives and were not like friends of friends. And that was actually a really big deal. A funny story is that my mom, after she was resigned to the fact that I wouldn't be a doctor, was like, well, I'm gonna make this guy successful, and became this epic pinner. So for a long time, a lot of the pins were just my mom, which was great.
I love your mom, that's awesome.
But it was cool when people didn't know. But no, I think that I have a lot of friends that have started companies, and everyone has like lucky breaks or not, but the controllable predictor of whether those companies succeed is just how long and how hard people work on them. And that's what I've seen kind of again and again. And that's actually something that I'm really appreciative of my parents, because you think about medicine, it's like minimum 12 years, maybe 16, and then you come out and you're the most junior doctor. So like that's their time scale. Their time scale is like minimum 12 years. And I think that's a nice contrast, because I think, especially in Silicon Valley, it's a little bit of an expectation that everything will just happen right away.
Are there, I look at Pinterest as a consumer site, but is there a commercial version, or is there an avenue for Pinterest as a, you know what I mean? It's
Do we make money?
no. That I know, and we're going to ask you about that in a second,
okay.
how you're making the money. But I really want to know if there's a sort of a commercial use for Pinterest that's maybe different, how the software might be used in a commercial fashion that's different than the way that you're serving it up today.
Well, so I said the average Pinterest user is really pinning for themselves. But there are always people and brands and small businesses that use it actually to showcase their taste. And so we've definitely seen that as one use case. Mm-hmm. And we actually see a lot of people in the creative industry use it as a tool for doing their work every day. Movie producers, fashion designers, artists that had this offline tool and then really just started using it online.
Mm-hmm. And what about, I mean, again, has it accelerated other, is it sort of eBay? People have, built their businesses on eBay. And is this sort of the next generation of that, where people can actually go online and this is how they accelerate their businesses, Pinterest?
Yeah, I mean, there are small businesses and big businesses where Pinterest has become their number one way of getting new customers. Because I think, a lot of businesses, the most basic problem they face is, how do I get discovered by people who care? Right? Like, it's like the basic thing. That's what advertising is designed to do. Get you discovered by someone who cares about what you make. And that's literally the entire purpose of the product. The mission of the company is to help you discover and do what you love. And a lot of those things, they come from businesses.
And I heard as we're marching up to the stage here, Mary Dillon saying that Ulta's built a lot of their business in part on Pinterest. So
I hope so.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I don't know if she was looking for a discount or. You talked about diversity. I want to just delve into that a little bit because it's more, I think for you, it's more than just, well, we wanted to have a good policy that people admired. I think you think of it as something important to the commercial future of Pinterest. Why is that? What's important about diversity in terms of just your business philosophy and how you're going to make money?
Well, Pinterest is a creative business, right? We built the product. We don't make the same thing cheaper. We made something new, and I really believe that the raw ingredient of any creative business is the set of experiences that the team has, the set of skills. And look, I think a simple fact is that if you have a different set of experiences based on how you grew up or how other people perceived you, or if you have a different set of skills, that will produce a better company. And the whole company is organized around it. There's this value at the company that we call knitting. And it was a little bit of a joke because knitting was big on Pinterest at the time. But it was this idea that the best products come when you take people that have all of these different backgrounds and skills and you focus them narrowly on one problem, and then they bring all of those together and they produce something that people haven't seen before. And so I loved Google, amazing company, but it was very one note. Engineering ran everything. And I wanted to build a business where whether you're an engineer or a designer or a marketer, whether you went to an elite school or you're kind of a weird misfit that built something, you could bring those talents to a place, and in turn, the product that you could build would then inspire more people to be creative themselves. And so that's why it's really important, and it's been really hard work, actually, to try to pull that off.
So is that creative part of the business, is that something important in your engineering team? Because we talked earlier in private about how important engineering, and having engineering talent is to building your business. And it's one reason why you made the comment that University of Illinois Champaign is a terrific resource and that you could really build great businesses here in Illinois. I guess I'm asking, is there a design element to that, a creative element to engineers that you look for when you're hiring?
Yeah, we look for people that can solve first principle problems and they can do it in a different way. I think, Evan and I talk about this a lot. A lot of people mix up creativity as if it's a specific skill. Like creativity is painting or drawing or sculpting. But creativity is like a way of solving problems, right? And you can be a creative lawyer and a creative engineer. These are creative disciplines. We're a creative historian, and we try to find people that have that, and then we try to tease that out in interviews. And often one of the best indicators is you ask them, how did you solve that problem? And what are all the different ways that you could have solved that problem that you didn't do? And how many of them did you try? And it's usually a pretty good indicator about whether somebody brings in all these experiences and tries the front door, tries the side door, tries the back door, tries to go through the chimney, tries to go through the basement. And those sorts of people are amazing to have at a startup because whatever problem comes in front of them, they'll try to think their way up from all those directions through it.
And so Google's known for the way that it screens its employees. And so did you take some of that from Google as you've built, because you built this fast, and how do you apply that in a company moving as fast as you have?
We started that way. Google was like the formative technology company I worked at. It's really hard to separate the things that a company does and the things the company does that are responsible for their success. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, let's not overthink this. They did it. Our engineering team will do the same thing. But increasingly, we started screening for things that are a lot more unique to Pinterest. I really only want to work with people who are fundamentally motivated to be part of something bigger than themselves. Right? They end up being better teammates. I love people who are mission-driven. I ask people to kind of narrate their life, and some people narrate it as kind of a story that's leading somewhere. And some people narrate it as like bullets on their resume. Like, first I went here, then I went there, then I acquired this skill, I got this promotion, now I want this job, because it's like the logical next step. And so I actually know those things are soft, but I really think that there's something about people who get their energy from being part of something bigger than them, who see sort of their role as part of a team of people, that it's really materially different. And we try more and more to find those people, because the flip doesn't work. Those people are often incredibly successful, but eventually their individual ambitions will come in conflict with helping their team be really great.
And so what are you mission-driven to do?
The mission of the company is to help people discover and do what they love. I think that you have so many choices today, right? There's never been more choice, but people don't have good tools to make value out of those choices, right? They end up doing what their friends did, or doing what was popular, or doing what they'd seen before. And I just feel like if you had a tool that was completely devoted to you, to understanding your interests, that could evolve as you evolve, I think you'd make simple choices that would be more in line with who you want to be. And I think you'd get more value out of those choices. And I would really love to build that. I think that would be an amazing thing for the world. So that's what I want to build.
And is there, I'm not sure how many companies you started and stopped as you were along it was a 2-year journey, it sounded like, 09 and 010, 08, 09, 010.
Yeah.
And you sort of failed fast, which is important in the startup world, right?
Sure.
You hope not to fail quite so many times, but you hit the big one. I guess my question is, so you're a serial entrepreneur. You just are. And so here you're at Pinterest, and I get that there's an enormous future for Pinterest, but you're also in your 30s. And so if you project forward, you're likely to start another company?
Gosh, we have so much work to do, to be honest. I feel like, I really do feel like we're just getting started. And you know what?
Is that what your investment bankers are telling you to say?
No, I have enough friends that tried to start companies, and I tried to do enough myself to know that I believe, at least, that a big part of starting a company is luck. It's timing. It's called timing, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't really control timing. The only two things you can do is you can sort of extend the amount of time that you're working on something. And then when you get a break, you can put all your chips in, right? And all my chips are in on this one. So I'm trying to stay very focused on making that work.
All right, so I'm going to ask my question a little bit differently then. When did you get your break?
When did we get our break? I think it's funny you mentioned that thing about failing fast. I think that had we taken that advice, we probably would have shut Pinterest down in the first couple months, because it really wasn't getting traction. And in Silicon Valley, you very rarely market things. And it's a weird thing. You only know if you should have stopped or kept going looking backwards. Right? You don't know looking forwards. It's like all gut. People are always asking me how do I know which idea to keep going on and which not to? I'm like, I don't know. It's just gut feel. But I think that was actually a really big break. The fact that we hung in there long enough that eventually we started to actually see people use and love the service and tell their friends, and then we started to see growth happening.
So how did you know to stick to it? What was the?
I don't know.
You got lucky?
I just
mean,
thought the
don't
product
believe
was so cool. You know, I was like, how is this not going to work? I love this thing. There must be people that are kind of like me who always love it. But, you know, it's funny. I said, like, my dad, you know, told me all about all these, like, scientists when I was a kid. And, you know, I heard once this story, you know, Newton, you know, came up with calculus, amazing, worked really hard. He's famous for it. And he worked for years to figure it out. And that's, looking back, that's genius, right? Everyone's like that. But he also spent his entire life trying to turn lead into gold, you know? And thank goodness the calculus worked out. Otherwise, he would have just been that smart guy that spent his whole time turning lead into gold. And so,
would have made a lot more money the other way, though.
yeah, I mean, you just don't really know. And so I think that, you know, people have different ways to try to figure it out. But I think it's a combination of your gut feel and then what you see. That's how it happens. And
so what would you advise the startup CEOs, particularly the ones who are still in that phase of, I'm not sure this is going to work, as they move along in their process? I mean, I guess we should all thank God you didn't stick to one of the other ones that you were working on because you got to Pinterest. But what would you say to somebody about how to decide maybe, you know, when to give up on this idea and move on to the next, or how long to stick to it? Well, sometimes the decision gets made for you because you run out of money or you burn out. So I would say you should pay attention to those things, or something outside will make that decision for you. And then I think you have to just trust your instincts. And hopefully, if you're lucky, like I got lucky, you get to partner with people and hire people that are better than you at all these different things, and then together you can make the best decisions you know how. And that's actually the biggest advice. You know, I had this image of entrepreneurs as these kind of like singular geniuses. Like this guy's in the garage and he invents this thing and like, bam, iPhone. And God, like everything good was made by a lot of people. And if you're the kind of person that can get a lot of people together and get them marching towards something, that's kind of like the ultimate superpower, because all of those different skills and experiences can be channeled towards one thing. And so, you know, one thing that I think is really true is that if all you do is find the right people and put them on the right job at the right time, you're actually doing a pretty good job as an entrepreneur. And so how did you get your team to gather and focus in the way that you just described? I mean, you basically just said leadership is the most important thing. It's not sort of the genius moment or the genius idea, but leadership. I mean, my early team was awesome. They were like total misfits, right? So, I mean, you got to remember, like, we were in this like horrible apartment. Like, it was disgusting. And the way we would recruit people is we would have a barbecue on Fridays, free barbecue, bring your own burger. And then what was cool is like people would just select in. And it was the perfect selection filter, because there could be no other reason to join us, because we had nothing else to offer them. Like, those people really loved the product and what we were doing, because there was no other reason to be there. And it was amazing. And, you know, it's funny, like, that's something that you actually lose as the company grows, right? As the company raises in profile, you get people that want to start a hot company. And I don't know, I mean, I think that if you can really stay ahead of getting really great people and getting the best out of them, like the genius out of those people, I really believe you can build pretty much anything. Critical to find a mentor, critical to have an idol that you're modeling. What advice would you give on that front? Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of people that were really generous with their time and their advice. I had an early investor named Kevin Hartz. He'd built these companies before, and he kind of showed me the ropes on how to do fundraising. He was like, no, you don't go to one person and get rejected and have them introduce you to someone else. I was like, oh, that's the problem. Like, I'm only getting introductions to people that already rejected me. But what was cool about him is he'd done it before and he'd gone through all these hard times. You know, I have a coach now, you know, folks that have kind of been there before, and just being able to talk through it with somebody, just talking it through it is pretty helpful. But I've been really lucky. You know, I talked to my parents. I asked them for their advice, and they haven't done business, but I don't know, they raised a family and they're doctors, so they have something to teach as well. And is there somebody in Silicon Valley that you look at today and say either, that's what I'm aiming at, or somebody who, you can imagine is, will be the mentor that you want to have, as you move toward an IPO and maybe building the business even bigger?
I mean, Silicon Valley, is full of people that are amazing.
I'm going to make you name one at
I mean,
least.
there's so many. Bezos is amazing. Elon Musk's amazing. Zuckerberg's amazing. Larry and Sergey are amazing. There's so many, but I don't know. I really feel like that lesson I learned during hyper growth is that, I don't know, you kind of got to do your own thing. Like if you spend all your time chasing other people and like trying to be someone you're not, it's hard enough. It's hard enough to do it if you're being kind of true to what you want to do. But if you're on top of it trying to be Elon Musk,
right.
or Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg, it's just not going to happen. So there are a lot of people I really admire, but I don't think there are any people that I want us to become.
So you worked at Google, and then you decided to leave and start your own company, which I'm sure Google is sorry about, at losing you, that is. But you've got, you've got people working for you, presumably, that dream of starting their own Pinterest. So what happened? People come to you and say, I'm taking off, I want to go start my own. Do you dissuade them, or do you encourage them? Are you investing in all of them because they're the next Pinterest? What's the...
There's part of me that, as a responsible employer, should dissuade them, but I just never want to be that guy. Like, I remember all those people that were like, don't do it, and they're kind of still on my, bad list. Not really, but, I don't know. If someone really wants to start a company for the right reasons, more power to them, and I just want to help them because so many people help me. And I think it's pretty disingenuous when somebody who maybe is in a position of power or is more senior tries to talk somebody out of their dream when at that moment they're actually looking for someone to give them a nudge. Like, they have enough voices in their head, telling them not to do it. They don't need one more who happens to be their boss, being like, don't do it, certain demise. Plus, I can't do it. I would feel terrible about myself.
Although isn't that the definition of a great entrepreneur, the ones who sort of, they have to run through that fire and ignore the folks who are telling them don't do it? Because everybody tells you not to do it when you're starting up a company, basically.
I don't know. I think everyone could use encouragement.
You want to be that guy.
Yeah, and and those are the people you remember in your life, right?
Yep.
You probably remember a teacher or a parent or a friend that just you can do that. Why not? And I don't know, do you want to be remembered as that person? Or do you want to be remembered as the guy who's don't do it, stay employed? It's really obvious choice, to me at least.
All right, so I have one last question for you. And it's usually I would ask you something that I thought would elicit a lot of laughter. But today, unfortunately, I have to ask this question because it's quite timely. The president issued an executive order that limits, as you know, immigration of refugees and others from predominantly Muslim countries. And I know there's been a lot of discussion in and out of Silicon Valley about the impact of that order on Silicon Valley, also about the impact of that order on the nation. What are your comments about it? What do you think about it? How's it going to affect your business? How do people who work for you think about that? Are they affected by it? And what do you think is the impact on the nation?
Never mind my company or the country. I think it's really bad for the world. I really do. Whatever you think about the details of that. Whatever you think about the details of how that thing is implemented, it sends a very clear message. And it sends a message that, we don't tolerate Muslims, and we don't want immigrants in this country. And there are a lot of people that work at Pinterest that are immigrants. Both sides of my family have immigrants. My wife is an immigrant. And it's crazy to me that in a country that held itself up as a destination, that's come to pass. And so I think it's a really scary time. And in terms of our employees, the first thing that matters to me is that they feel like the company will stand up for them and then we'll cover them. And then in terms of what we need to do broadly, I think I'm trying to figure it out. It's the first week, first week. And so I think we'll have to think really hard about what kind of future that we really want to all live in.
Thank you very much for joining us, Ben.